welcome back to the Down Below, where I'll be recapping and reviewing the finale episode of Silo. For those of you who haven't watched episode 10 yet, I am going to be discussing key plot details, so this is your spoiler warning. And as usual, don't miss out on our new YouTube channel that we're launching called The Horror Exchange. Links down below. So after 10 weeks of individual episode releases, we finally arrive at the summit of season 1, which overall I'll give a 7 out of 10. Silo set a blistering pace in the first 2 episodes, which were released together, but then began to slow down for the most part until episode 8, which from a viewer standpoint was a little bit frustrating. However, in episode 10, I was expecting a lot of the questions that were thrown up during season 1 to be answered, or at least heavily touched upon. The episode opens with Juliet in Patrick Kennedy's apartment with computer hacker Danny, and Juliet wants to find a way to project the video file footage of Jane Carmody onto all of the computer systems around the silo. According to Danny, there are signal boosters dotted around the silo which allow this, with the nearest one being on the 126th floor, and to get there undetected they opt to use the garbage chutes. We also see Sims loses control on multiple occasions as well during the episode, with the first coming from when he questions Billings about why he was in Juliet's apartment after she managed to threaten his wife and son. He snaps and throws a chair, whilst also bringing up that he knows that Billings is always shaking. It was quite an uncomfortable scene, this one, because we do see Billings in a very vulnerable state in this situation, and it made me question about whether he was responding to the additional threat coming from Sims, or if this was his condition actually deteriorating for the worse. Juliet manages to override the computers and display the video footage on all of the monitors, and we get to view this from the perspective of the janitorial control room. Bernard panics and orders all of the operatives to look away from the monitors, including Sims, which I found very interesting, although I couldn't quite gauge what his reaction was to this, as his facial expressions were pretty deadpan. But the first plot hole moment I found in episode 10 was when Bernard randomly knows, out of complete thin air, that Juliet is in the garbage chute. I guess you could play this off as, well, he's the mayor and he knows the silo really well, but I mean, come on, it's just a little bit unbelievable that he's come up with this concrete conclusion about Juliet's location, and then he's sent the full sheriff department to her exact whereabouts, where they amusingly dump an air conditioning unit on her. This is also supplemented with an even more ridiculous scene where, in order to avoid being struck from the AC unit, Juliet decides to let go of the ladders, fall 100 feet onto the recycling pile, where there's metal pipes either side of her, and then be pulled away from the falling AC unit just in time by the recycling workers. Alright then, we'll just brush past all of this. Juliet is then hiding away at Walk's house, where she's finally caught by Bernard, Sims and the raiders. Bernard smashes the hard drive with a mallet before asking Juliet to stop saying that she didn't ask to go outside and clean, and to waive her right to a judicial hearing, and he'll make it worth her while. Well, Juliet reluctantly agrees to this before she's marched out in front of the silo in arm and leg shackles, which I really thought was a cool scene, to be fair. The score here really reminded me of something from the likes of Game of Thrones, with the strings that effectively support the intensity of the scene. We then get quite a moving scene where Walk finally leaves her home after 25 years to go and help Juliet, because she's all that Juliet has. I did like this scene because it touches a little bit on the effects of mental health within the silo. I imagine it's some kind of generalized anxiety disorder that Walk has, which has entrapped her for so many years. But comment down below if you know the reason why Walk hasn't left her quarters in over a quarter of a century. Walk then travels to someone called Carla's house, who works in supply, and starts a discussion about heat tape, which is a throwback to the earlier episodes. More on this in a few minutes. But Juliet is then taken to janitorial, where she's shown the CCTV footage of George not being murdered but actually taking his own life so that he's not tortured for information about the location of the hard drive. It's quite a nice move from Bernard, really, by showing George in a better light before Juliet is sent out to clean. Interestingly, Bernard does a U-turn on his decision in the last episode about not making Sims his shadow, and I think this is evident that it's because Sims now seen what's on the monitors, so he's just trying to sweeten him up a little bit. The absolute snake. Lucas Kyle gets a bit of a brutal conclusion to his story, though. He has a discussion in handcuffs with Bernard, who says that he's not going to send him out to clean for aiding their investigation and search for Juliet, but he's going to be banished to the mines for 10 years, where he won't won't see daylight anymore, which is the antithesis of the sky that he's been studying in the cafeteria. Billings does get a slightly better conclusion though to his involvement in season 1, as he tells his wife that he has been granted an exemption for having the syndrome and will be the new sheriff. But again, this definitely comes with strings attached, which we're yet to find out, but I imagine this will be touched on heavily in season 2. But towards the climax of the episode, Bernard goes to visit Juliet, who is in holding cell 3, coming full circle from Holston and Allison's incarceration in episode 1 and 2. And he says that he finds no pleasure in what he's doing, yet says to Juliet that her troubles started from conception because her parents were never supposed to give birth. It's hardly her fault though. I mean, it just shows the doomed path that she's been on for such a long time. Bernard goes on to say that as an engineer, Juliet has to make adjustments to the generator to avoid an explosion. And like her, he is also an engineer but of the silo and has to make adjustments to avoid it going boom. But the time has now come for Juliet to go outside. She's dressed in her cleaning suit, and the heat tape that's been mentioned frequently in the episode is used to create a seal between the suit and her gloves. Juliet has read her sentencing statement from the pact and begins to make the ascent on the other side of the airlock. It's just the coolest part about the series in my opinion. It's like Halo meets Fallout, and I just want more of this and less of the silo politics, which I haven't really been that interested in, but is the route that the show decided to go down in the end. So Juliet makes the same walk that many before her have, but she refused to clean the camera lens once she was outside and whispered that the screens are a lie. She stumbles in the same place that Holston did, but puts her hand down on the ground on a rock, which shows that it's an illusion. She looks at the tape again, which suggests it's having a major impact on how she's managing to sustain the outside toxins and rise to her feet again. She crests the hill and sees a huge run-down city in the distance, which is shown through a brilliant panning shot that also shows hundreds of other silos around her. So to conclude, I think episode 10 just isn't that great in all honesty, but it is consistent with what we've seen from Silo across the board. It's quite entertaining, it's decent, but it's not great, and it's certainly not a must watch. The ending has been done before. Think back to The Maze Runner, where there's all of a sudden hundreds of other mazes that are revealed. However, I think that the way that season 1 ended, it sets itself up well for season 2 and to be much better. The outside world from that pan shot looks so much more interesting to me than the inside of the silo, but whether it can capitalise on this is another story. I'm guessing it'll probably take another 10 episodes across 10 separate weeks for Juliet to actually reach the city. And I also want to give my conclusive thoughts on the episode by episode release rather than a full series dump. A weekly episode across 10 weeks has worked against Silo in my opinion. It's felt like the show has been drawn out, it's been milked in this format with very little payoff in the end. And I think from a viewing standpoint, I would have preferred to binge the show because I don't think the writing's been strong enough to warrant a weekly release, with a lot of episodes not having particularly compelling talking points. But those are just my thoughts and opinions, and thank you for coming on this journey with me to the end. As always, leave in the comments what you thought of the finale and the season as a whole. I've been your host Hugh from Unleash the Ghouls. Subscribe to the Horror Exchange, and I'll see you next time, hopefully up top for season 2 of Silo.